Hi, welcome to another episode of Mom Does It All. If you're looking for encouragement, empowerment, and uplifting in motherhood and mompreneurship, this is a show for you. I'm your host, Marta Spurk, triplet mom, woman empowerment coach, and all things motivation extraordinaire. On this episode, I bring in a review and a reflection of my recent impromptu trip to Brazil and also share my main takeaway from this whole experience, that nothing in this life is random and you're exactly where you're supposed to be right now. Let's get right to it. So I just got back from a very impromptu trip to Brazil. I got to go by myself, didn't take the kids, my husband didn't go. And it was a very last minute thing because I had talked about this possibility before, but with the kids being little, having to have help from family, it just didn't seem like a very feasible possibility. And I hadn't been back in 3 years. And it's crazy to think because when I lived here in the United States before, when I first got married, I used to go 2, sometimes 3 times a year because I was working as an interpreter for my mom's church and interpreting in the conferences down there. And this time around, came over here, never looked back with 3 kids, and have been doing this mom thing of triplets up here without any help from family for the most part, because all of my family lives either in Brazil or in Nebraska, so far away. And recently this opportunity came up because my parents had just visited and they were talking about my grandma, how she wasn't doing very well. She's 91, by the way, and I hadn't seen her in these 3 years. And this entire time I was thinking, I wanted my kids to be able to see her again now that they're old enough to understand and see and, know who she is. But it's just really hard to make this trip. It's a long trip. Even when I arrived yesterday, I was extremely tired, wanting to be with the kids and spend time, but just constantly passing out on the couch and just being extremely tired because it's almost 24 hours, right? From the time you leave to go to the airport, it's almost 24 hours. I think it's 21 hours that you're in the airport, you're on the airplane, you're just waiting around, and it's extremely exhausting. And I wanted to record this episode to talk about my experience down there because it was kind of like a full circle experience, obviously, because I hadn't been there in 3 years, but also of figuring out so many things inside of me that seemed like they were just pending, loose ends and emotionally, for the most part. And I wanted to do it while it's fresh on my mind. Kind of a little afraid of not doing justice to the whole experience, but I will be talking more about it. This is going to be within me for the next few days, months, years, because it just represents the changes that I have been going through in my life inside of me because I've chosen to do this inner work and really work on myself as a person and become the best version of myself. And I have to share this with you because this has been this entire process of 3 years, ever since I moved back to the US. It has been sharing my journey, figuring things out for myself now as a mom, and sharing this to help other women going through tough transitions or just, going through life, period. And in this trip, so the reason why we decided that I should go was because of my grandma. But at the same time, I knew going back there would do so much more than that for me because I hadn't gone in 3 years. And because of the way we left, it was tough. It was tough making the decision to leave my family when I had just had 3 babies. But it has a lot to do with the way that I left the very first time. And this is part of the story that I wanted to tell. I'm not sure how much of it I'll be able to tell today in a few minutes, but I come from a very strict Christian family, and it takes somebody that has grown up in a situation like this to really, really understand what that does to you. Not just being in that super involved Christian family, but the fact that my mom was a pastor and that I was very involved in the church because I was interpreting, because I was leading worship. And that creates certain things inside of you that it takes a while for you to start being able to start processing that on your own. And that's the reason why I feel like it was very important for me to get married and leave, so that I could figure out life for myself. Because up until then, there were a lot of things that were imposed upon me. And looking back, while I was in this situation, it was very mixed feelings of feeling grateful for being shown that path, but also feeling resentful because I felt very deprived and oppressed even. And being able to leave to just build life on my own was extremely difficult on me, on my family, and on my husband, because I had to make that decision in order to, start this new life with somebody that loved me and truly wanted to be with me. But at the same time, I didn't want to because I was afraid of leaving what was behind. And I feel like the combination of being in a very strict family like that and the culture of Brazil, where kids stay very close to their parents the entire time. They live with their parents until they get married. And even so, sometimes it almost feels like they're still living with their parents because it's just such a tight-knit community and way of living that you're always having to report back and say what you're doing, talk about what's going on. And it's a culture of dependence, right? It's that there's not a whole lot of individuality and independence. And for me to just up and leave like that, it was a shock and it was hard. But I knew that that's what I needed to do to be able to kind of break free and start from scratch, but with the knowledge that I had. And then going back to Brazil to live there for 3 years, married, was another very intense experience because my husband had no idea what the culture was like, except for, trips, but that's not the same as actually living in the country. And then he learned the language. He kind of learned the ways. He wasn't very happy with it because it's very, very different than what he grew up with and because of his personality type. And then here comes everybody's uniqueness because of his personality type. He's a type 1 on the Enneagram, by the way. He is very attached to details, to logic, to things making sense. And then when it doesn't have a purpose in his head, it should not be there and it should be changed. Whereas for me, I am just very easygoing and I just, let things go. I don't get caught up in the details. That's why it's so insane for us to be together. But at the same time, I always say that we complement each other because we're teaching each other a different worldview, right? In so many ways, because we're so different in terms of personality, but because of our different cultures. And so when we lived there for that time and had the kids down there in Brazil, it was just tough because of these differences. And choosing to leave once again was a decision that was needed for us to be able to raise our family the way that we wanted to. And again, figure things out our way, which is what I did the very first time. But this time it was harder because I had 3 babies with me, because I was a first-time mom. And actually, the ultimate decision to leave was mine. Once again, I was not pressured by my husband to move. It was because I wanted to go back to the United States. And now, in hindsight, I see that the reason why was very similar to the very first time. I wanted to figure things out for myself. And now that the kids are a little bit older and we had this opportunity to go down there, I was able to kind of see this bigger picture that I hadn't been able to see because I'm living life. I'm living this life. So it's kind of hard for you to detach yourself and with a bird's eye view, see your own life. But again, this is what I encourage women to do, is to be able to talk to somebody or put these feelings out there, whether it be through journaling, through speaking it out, whatever, so that you can see your life from an outsider's perspective, not be so biased, which is so hard, so that you can appreciate your journey and develop these feelings of gratitude and forgiveness for yourself, for everybody around, because that's what makes life lighter, and that's what enables you to make better decisions for your future, because you're able to see everything from a more detached perspective. And this entire trip really, really proved to me that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That nothing in my life up until this point has been random, because everything is cause and effect, right? And that's another thing that I've been reconciling within me, is all of the upbringing that I've had, all the background that I've had, believing the Bible, believing all of these things from Christianity, and then detaching myself a little bit from it, exploring all these other things that I wasn't able to explore before because they were considered wrong. But now just having an open mind to learning about these things and then making my own decision as to what I believe in, instead of having that imposed upon me. And the more I looked into these other things, the more they have pointed me back to the core values, principles, beliefs that I was taught while I was, a part of the church, a part of my family, and not my own person, if you will. And one of these things is that every decision that you make has a repercussion, right? It will have a consequence. But at the same time, you have a path laid out for you because you were born with certain gifts, with certain desires. Those things were there for a reason, for you to impact the world a certain way. And everything that I have done up until this point, with getting married, moving away, moving back, then moving back again, and now doing this trip, they have been preparing me for the things that I have been doing and for the vision that I have for myself in the future, which is impacting even more women's lives with this message of self-awareness, self-discovery, self-exploration, that you really, really have to get to know yourself so that you can live life to its fullest, feel fulfilled in who you are, feel happy in the very present moment instead of searching for something in the future that will fulfill you, or regretting the decisions you didn't make in the past, but really, really live in the present and affect everybody around you positively by really stepping into your purpose. But first, you have to really figure out what that is. And it's not a one-day thing. It's a journey, right? You start taking turns and twists and detours, and all of them are right there for a reason, to show you certain things about yourself. And it's important that you choose to see in those moments. So one of the things so in this trip, I got to do a couple things besides visiting my grandma. That was an experience in itself that made me reflect about life and, look back into my childhood and all the moments that my grandma was there with me. And then because I was very close with her, I was very close with my grandpa too, but he's passed. It's been like 12 years now, and it didn't impact me as much as seeing my grandma getting extremely old and, in the condition that she is right now. And just looking back into my childhood and reevaluating all of those moments, because I have been doing this now that I'm a mom, and I've talked about this several times, that once you have a kid, it's your do-over. It's your chance to relive your childhood, but from an adult's perspective, and be able to forgive that past and be grateful for that past. And now, seeing my grandma like that, I reevaluated everything as well, and it was a tough process to think that, somebody that I have been with for so long, even though I've lived abroad and everything, her life is coming to an end. And it's hard even saying those words. And to think that the same will happen to me and my kids. And I always say this, regardless of your beliefs of, what happens after life, going through this process here is never easy, because it makes you think about your choices. It makes you think about the future. What am I doing with my life? Am I on the right path? And so the two other things that I got to do in Brazil that prompted even more of a reflection was the fact that I got to do this workshop. So advancing even more with my coaching and being able to do this live event for 20 women down in Brazil. It was something that all of a sudden we were able to put together because of a friend of mine from my childhood that I reconnected with because of the podcast. So all of these things coming together, and it's like, come on, there's no way that this happened by chance. It was all of these things coming together so that I could reconnect with her. She would find me by chance. She would just, stumble upon my podcast and not even know that it was me. And really enjoyed this message because it's the very moment that she's living in her life, being a mom. And then realizing it's me, started talking to me, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is all I've needed. Meanwhile, she had a friend that is older than her, that was a friend of her mom's actually, but that she got so close to. And this woman talks a lot about self-awareness and understanding yourself and knowing what you're putting out there in the world, how you're showing up in the world. And she had talked about these things so long, but when my friend listened to my podcast, she was able to, that really dawned on her. And she was actually able to apply this to her life and start making changes. And in the meantime, that friend of hers was like, okay, I've been telling you this entire time and you enjoyed it, but never really did anything with it. And now this other person that you haven't talked to in years, like 20 years, starts talking to you and it dawns on you. And she was like, how is that possible? But how many times doesn't that happen in our lives, right? Somebody's telling us that one thing that we need to do, that we should do. They're looking at our lives from the outsider's perspective and diagnosing that that's what we need. And we can't really figure it out until somebody else comes around, says the exact same thing, but in a different way. It comes from a different person. You are in that moment where you can actually absorb that information and things start moving. How many times doesn't that happen in life, right? And that's why I believe that nothing is random. Everything is working together, kind of like in the behind the scenes, for when you reach that one moment in your life where you're actually able to make that change, to see things that way, because otherwise you wouldn't have been able to. So many times in life, we think that it's just a straight shot up until our purpose, up until, our end goal. And in reality, it's not. There are so many detours. And why is that? Because there are some lessons that we need to learn, right? There are people that we need to meet that are going to tell us that one message that's going to change our path and change our life. And this is what happened to my friend. And so she was the one when I said, okay, I'm going to go back to Brazil. This was last minute. Can you help me? Maybe do something small for women. And she was like, yes, I'm on it. And right away, she talked to one other friend of hers that has a photography studio that could hold a few people. We organized this entire thing. They invite their friends. I was advertising it online, and 20 people show up, and my mom decides to go, which I wasn't sure how I felt about that, because that's another thing that has been one of the conflicts inside of me, is the work that I'm doing is not religious, right? It's not focused on Christianity. And to have come from this background, it's a little hard for me sometimes to do this. But again, it's been part of the process of me figuring things out for myself and detaching from everything that I knew. And I wasn't sure how exactly she felt about that. And it's going back to everything that I talk about. You should not live your life worrying about what others think of you. But it's not always that easy, especially when it comes to certain people. And for me, that certain people is my mom. But she went. She really enjoyed it. She was touched. She contributed. And that was another experience for me to be able to share what I'm doing without being afraid of what she thinks, and to have a positive feedback from her as well. And one of the people that went to the workshop was my friend's friend, this older lady that I actually interviewed for the Brazilian podcast. She works with horses, and she does the self-awareness training for people. She has a beautiful, beautiful story. And I had talked to her before. So when I first started talking to my friend, she recommended this lady. She was like, you have to interview her. She has an amazing story. She was a speaker at TEDx in Sao Paulo. She's just incredible. And I interviewed her. And then at the time, she was like, I would love for you to come see the work that I do with the horses and do this together. And I was like, I have no clue when I'm going to go back to Brazil. So we left it at that. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, I'm going to Brazil. So I invite her to the workshop. She goes, and then she says, all right, let's go do that training with the horses. I'm really excited for you to go see what I do. And I was too, because another thing that's been happening a lot to me is I have been prompted to go work with horses, do something with horses for a long time. Pretty much, I've always had this in my heart. And I remember even having conversations with my husband before we got married and saying I wanted to be around horses. And I know that that was something that, just thinking back to when I used to go to Tulsa, Oklahoma, it's very rural, and it's something very different than what I'm used to growing up in the big city, urban Sao Paulo. And I've always had it in my heart that I wanted to do something with horses. But it just never happened. And then ever since having the kids, they're obsessed with horses. And of course, it's just another animal. You know what I mean? Like, you can see things of just dismissing them all the time, or you can start looking around your life and start seeing all these signs, all these little things that are pointing you that direction, all those little nudges, right? And you can take them at face value, or you can actually start investigating and understanding that's part of your path. That's, guiding you towards something. And so there I go to do this course after an entire week of all these emotions, seeing the house that I used to live in, seeing all these people that I hadn't seen in so long. We even got to go to the beach, which is that specific beach is the place that I used to go to a lot when I was a kid because my aunt and uncle lived there for 30 years. So it was all of this, I almost felt like when people describe it when they're in their deathbed, that they see all these memories in just like a flash. I felt like I was going through that process. And it really made me think back to the process that I have been intentionally forcing upon myself of reevaluating my past and connecting it to my present and projecting into my future, but not in a trauma perspective, but really intentionally and mindful of what I want. And understanding that you don't have to wait until your deathbed or until something very difficult comes to you, like finding out you have cancer or having a loved one pass away, for you to make this evaluation or reevaluation. You can be intentional about this. And this is what will actually empower you to step into your purpose. Because then it's you really looking around you and understanding that so many things are pointing you towards a certain direction. And instead of just being taken by it, you start walking it yourself. Very, very mindful of what's happening. And this is what I believe I'm going through right now. And what I'm encouraging women to do is be very aware of all these signs and all these nudges that are happening so that you can make this process even more enjoyable and stronger, And so after that entire week of having all of these feelings and reconciling these emotions and understanding these things inside of me, I get to go and do this horse experience, which I think I even need to dedicate an entire episode to talk about that because I haven't had a chance to interview her in English. But basically, it's a training that you're not learning to ride the horse. Usually you would think that's what we're going to do. No. It's the entire time you're on the ground and you're testing yourself by giving the animal certain commands. And of course, I believe that, the more you do that, the easier it will be because you have more confidence. For me, not being around horses, not really knowing, it was a first time experience. It's going to be tricky. So it's not a matter of, okay, so the horse didn't correspond to what you wanted him to do. That must mean you're messed up inside or something. It's not about that. It's really about you learning something new. And this happens with different stuff too. Like I remember going through a similar process, learning how to ski. because I was older. I'd never been around it. So it really shows you instantly your fears because it puts you in a situation of unknown like none other. And your reaction is very authentic because there's no way to hide it. What am I going to do? So this process, even though it was my very first time, so you have to take all those things into account, it really showed me the things that I struggle with the most. And in my case, it was being assertive. I wasn't necessarily too afraid of the horse. In some instances, yes, because it's a huge animal and I'm not used to it. But for the most part, it really showed me how by having this personality, easygoing, it's all right, it doesn't matter. There is a downside to that, which is people can step all over me. People can, manipulate me. People can really tell me off and dim my light, which is not by coincidence. That's something that I've been talking a lot about lately, how we allow other people to dim our light and we just sit there. And I have been learning not to do that and to understand that I don't have to dim anybody else's light to shine mine brighter either, because it's an individual process. It has nothing to do with anybody else. And that's why me and that horse standing inside that circle really showed me that. It was like me facing my fears, me facing life and my future. And at the same time, understanding not only that I have something powerful inside of me that I have to be able to hone in on and take advantage of, which is my own personal mission and my own energy, but realizing that there's something bigger out there, God, guiding me and helping me, but ultimately he can't do anything unless I'm stepping into that myself. So it's that ownership of life, ownership of your weaknesses, and really wanting to make a change for the best. Forgiving yourself, loving yourself, understanding your limitations, but understanding that you can move past that. So it was a very, very intense experience. And what was interesting was that we did this in a group. So there were 2 other girls that had done classes before. And it was interesting to see them, even though they had done this before, they still struggled in some points. And it's, usually because of assertiveness, because of focus. So everyone was dealing with something there. And one of the girls, when she was introducing herself to me, she said, I'm a psychologist. I've worked in a clinic for years. Now I'm head of the HR at a company. And I love everything that I've learned, everything that I've, worked with. Obviously, I'm not disregarding anything. But after doing this for so many years, what goes on in that circle when you're with that horse, it's kind of like worth 2 years of therapy because it's undeniable. The things that you see, it's just, and then it is because the horse is such a sensitive animal. It's just, you just can't deny it. Once you see your reaction in there, and that's what I was talking about, being in a different situation, dealing with the unknown, that's when you really know yourself because you can't hide it. There is no other way for you to react. Whereas with people, sometimes we can kind of circumvent the situation and kind of change things up. We can't really, you can kind of hide and whatever, but in that situation, you can't. So it becomes very clear to you what you need to work on. And that's why it was such an amazing experience. And I want to talk more about it, of course. But the message here for today's episode is to reassure you that everything that you have lived up until this point has had a purpose. And the more you decide to look back and understand that, the lighter your life will be and the easier your path moving forward will be for you because you will understand that nothing is random. Because your decisions have repercussions and because everything is a consequence, but also because you needed to go through those things to be able to be where you are. There is no way you would have been where you are if you hadn't gone through those things, which means those were all lessons and messages that you needed to learn to strengthen you to take your next steps forward. And so when you know that, moving forward, you will know as things are happening to you that you can get something out of that situation and become stronger and understand your purpose and impact people's lives around you with more intentionality and mindfulness, because you know those things are happening for a reason. They're preparing you for something. Everything is about a preparation for that next event, because you're not alone. And in my case, I have been understanding more and more that throughout this entire time, God has been with me and leading me and guiding me. And even if you don't want to think about it in that way, if you want to think about the laws of nature, the laws of the universe, which were created by somebody, by the way, they're always around because you can't live without them. They're there. And that's what determines your life and the consequences and the effects of your decisions and of your actions. So just be encouraged today to look around you and see how everything is conspiring for your best. And take advantage of that to move forward with confidence and know that you have a purpose, that you have a calling, and that you are impacting people's lives with your life, regardless of what you're doing right now. But the more aware you become, the easier this process will be, instead of resisting and instead of fighting. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope this episode was as encouraging to you as this entire trip and experience was to me. Have a wonderful day, and until next time, bye.